carried. And the next item on the agenda is that report, and I would like to move that report. Do I have a seconder for that? Sarah Templeton. So I think the first thing would be just to open it up. I mean, I'm happy to introduce it if that would be useful, and then respond to any questions that you might have, and then we can move on to the to a debate on it, and hopefully that won't take too much time. So you'll recall that that I presented an earlier paper to the council back in April, which seems quite a long time ago, and yet it really wasn't, because so much has happened in that time, given the impact of the COVID-19 series of events that have followed from the COVID-19 crisis. Part of our resolution on the 2nd of April was to review our strategic directions together with letters of expectations in relation to our long-term plan process, and to discuss with the Greater Christchurch Partnership the work that has been done on Greater Christchurch 2050. Out of that, the thinking that was done in relation to that, there has been a lot of in-depth conversation going on behind the scenes with a range of strategic partners to really reflect on how we can build on what we already have. And I think, from a lesson learned point of view from the earthquake experience, is that establishing what already exists, building on what we already have, and engaging with all of our communities in a very strategic and sensible way unleashes the potential of all of those that have got something to bring to the table. And what we don't have when we set up something new in order to take over from what already exists is that as soon as the crisis is over, as soon as the external parties withdraw, we're back to square one and we have to start again. And we saw that with a number of structures that were pre-existing the earthquake experience, which simply had to be recreated in a post-earthquake recovery environment as we moved on to regeneration. I think another lesson learned out of our own experience is that when you develop structures in order to see you through a response and an immediate recovery focus, and then on to regeneration, or in this framing, the repositioning of our city in the context of our sub-region and our region, so Greater Christchurch and the Canterbury region, it's always good to be thinking ahead as to how you dial things down, and then how you can dial things up given different scenarios. So I think we've learned that scenario planning is core critical to preparedness, and it's core critical to resilience. So again, this is an open, transparent and democratically accountable way to engage all of our communities in their diversity, in the whole thinking around both recovery and repositioning the city, the Greater Christchurch and the region. So we're noting specifically the work that's been undertaken by Christchurch NZ to partner with other groups in the immediate response to the crisis and to lay the groundwork for our economic recovery, and including the recently established Christchurch Economic Recovery Forum. We heard one of the members of the forum speak yesterday in the annual plan hearings, speak about being a member of that forum and what that means. So that model is the model that we want to adopt to establish a broader socio-economic recovery forum. But the paper doesn't go into the detail of the how, it just sets out the framework of the why. In the immediate context, obviously, there is a need to focus on the entire employment continuum, and it's talking about self-employment, entrepreneurship, supporting economic activity while looking for opportunities to help businesses pivot. It acknowledges the role that the council has in ensuring that the capital program provides a steady and reliable pipeline of work, and we're hearing that from submitters during the plan discussions as well. And to ensure in this context that the value for money procurement framework enables the council to be both agile and responsive. But I think we're hearing a message too about that local focus, and I think that's a very powerful and strong message that we need to be reinforcing every opportunity that we can. Agree to adopt a Christchurch-wide framework for recovery that also seeks to catalyse renewal and encourages a thriving, resilient, prosperous city and region, and it just identifies the different components of how that would be delivered. And there was just a lovely match between the existing work that sits in behind the urban development strategy, and it was really good to go back, and I often remind people how good it is to read that, and that's why at the beginning of the paper you can actually see the vision statement that was written in 2007 and how meaningful it is, and it speaks very much to the present day environment. So you know, I suppose it's that French saying, plus cela change, plus la même chose. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And I think we're seeing that very much in some of the very strong forward thinking that's been done as a Greater Christchurch partnership. But I'm also going to acknowledge the significant adjustment in the Canterbury Mayoral Forum's work program to contribute to the economic recovery, and there's a real shift to thinking about the future in terms of climate change, thinking about the impact on the environment, thinking about the impact of getting mode shift occurring, particularly with the transport of freight in the region. You know, it really is quite an advanced, forward-thinking approach coming from the Canterbury Mayoral Forum, and I pay tribute to Sam Broughton taking up a leadership role in that space. And then finally, just repeating our strategic directions, but enabling us to focus on why they are relevant now in the post-COVID-19 crisis environment, and asking the external advisory group to take these changes into account and factor them into their advice on the LTP. And I think, so the whole approach, but perhaps the one that I'll just end on is is the question of number 9. So number 9 one, because that to me is really critical to this, and that is agree that the recovery action plan, and it has to be action, will include indicators and performance measures and processes for ongoing monitoring of both actions and outcomes. So there is no point having a series of actions, they're called outputs, unless they are actually delivering the outcomes that we are seeking to achieve. And we need to have very clear, measurable outcomes, and they need to be presented in such a way that both management and governing bodies are able to see what's going on, both in the national and global context, but more importantly, so that communities can actually see the progress that is being made, as well as how they can contribute to success. Because this is not a paper that talks about the City Council doing things for people. It's a City Council focused on enabling communities, businesses, people who work within the environment, people who work within the cultural and the art space. It's an enabling environment to enable us to unleash the potential of people who live in our city and beyond, in order to ensure that we do have a city that is both livable and sustainable and resilient. in the very broadest sense of the word. So, so that's the intent of the paper, and it puts a lot on the shoulders of the Chief Executive, but also the work of Christchurch NZ, the Greater Christchurch Partnership, working in a collaborative framework for Greater Christchurch 2050, which is the right horizon to be thinking of. If you think about our long-term plan process, that is our whole focus for our infrastructure strategy that we're legally required to do. And if we're thinking about infrastructure in the context of 2050 and we're thinking about Greater Christchurch in the context of 2050, then we're actually having the right conversation. So that's the framework and the intention. So has anyone got any questions? Otherwise, we'll just move on to the debate. Aaron.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions, and they're quite big ones. The first one is I couldn't find anything that signalled a clear conduit between the council and government. Government play a really large role in recoveries, and 2 weeks ago New Zealand was in an enviable position of being one of the first countries to have COVID with deaths and then go to basically 0 cases. So we were the envy of the developed world, essentially. And so what's our position with talking with government? Because I look at things like the shovel-readies, and there's tradesmen in the city laying off staff now, and the shovel-readies were meant to start to be announced 6 weeks ago. The government did the lolly scramble in February, and we got 130,000 out of 12 billion. And now the city more than ever needs support and to work with the government. So where does that sit in this paper? And there should be a conversation weekly because the landscape's changing so much. So,
yeah,
so that's my first question.
Yeah, central government's working collaboratively with local government as a sector. So rather than going to the 70 individual councils around the country, they are working collaboratively with Local Government New Zealand and SOGM, which is the Society for Local Government Managers.
And I understand that.
And
but
where it is sitting in the paper, which was your question, is 8, which is to agree to adopt a Christchurch-wide framework for recovery that also seeks to catalyse renewal and encourages a thriving, resilient, prosperous city and region through, and it lists a number of things, but the third one on that agenda is collaborating with strategic partners and leveraging opportunities. That is specifically about our relationship between particularly Christchurch, Waimakariri and Selwyn and central government. So they are the core partners in terms of the work that is being done. Now, a number of our shovel-ready projects that were put into the mix relate to Three Waters, as you know, and you also know that central government has not put the resources into that space yet because there is still a bigger conversation going on in terms of what is the way to fund that. And the proposal we put to central government was that we had a cost-sharing agreement for horizontal infrastructure after the earthquakes. It worked well. If you want to spread money widely and deeply across the entire New Zealand economy, then a cost-sharing agreement around the Three Waters infrastructure would be the best way to go. So that's what we've asked to be put in the mix, and I know that that is still being considered in the context of the Three Waters review. So
as a council, on behalf of our city, how do we hold the government to account? Because they've borrowed $50 billion to use Keynesian economics to buy our way out of a hole, which I do agree with, but we've got tradesmen being laid off every week now, waiting on these projects to get started. They ask for shovel-ready, which means ready to go, as in start work tomorrow. Why are those projects not being greenlit right now? And I understand the Three Waters one, and that's a percentage, but that's not the only ones.
No, but
we need that work.
Yeah, well, yeah, none of the work that we proposed is dependent or waiting on the government for funding. So if the government provides funding to any of those projects, and it was never clear what proportion of that. So some of the focus has been on clearing away some of the regulatory barriers to proceeding with projects. So the government's introduced legislation this week with a number of projects, but we didn't need regulatory barriers cleared for any of the projects apart from the redevelopment or the enabling provision that goes into our district plan. And we're using the Section 71 process, which will be faster than the piece of legislation which they are proposing to take away the regulatory barriers for the others. So it's there was more than one string to the bow. I think you're making it sound like everyone was allowed to put in a wish list for every shovel-ready project. They had a set of very specific criteria which we followed in putting in our submission. So I'm still very hopeful that we will gain benefit from having participated in that process, but I'm not as worried about it as you are.
Yeah, because none of the PPPs have been announced for this part of the world either. I know that some big ones up north have, but not for Christchurch. So that's
we didn't propose any PPPs.
We supported them as a council in the list that went through, the private sector ones for Christchurch.
They're not PPPs, they're private sector ones.
Well, if the public's putting money in and it's a private sector project, I'd call that a PPP.
Okay,
maybe it's not.
Yep.
But
right.
And then the
We're
other one
debate.
is the measurable outcomes in something like this, because you can have as many recovery plans as you want, but if there's not measurable outcomes like, especially around unemployment and employment and the economy, if those numbers aren't in here for us to be held to account to, so people can come in a month, 6 months or a year and say, hey, look, your plan said you would have this, like a business plan would,
yep.
At this point in time, we would be here.
Yep.
I don't see that in here.
No, that's because this hasn't set the baseline, but the baseline will be established as part of this process. So all of this information will be in the public arena and it will be easily able to be tracked, and people will have an expectation of living up to what they promised to deliver. Yep.
Thank
Yanni.
you.
Yanni?
Thank you. Yep, cool. Thank you. But similar to Aaron's question, I just wanted to understand how we're going to engage with the government and with local members of parliament.
Sorry?
Government.
I was just trying to understand what our strategy is for working with central government around this process, like meeting with MPs, talking to the different
meeting with MPs isn't
political...
meeting with the government, Yanni. I think I've explained
No, I know
that
that.
before. But
sorry, I'll give you some examples. Meeting with ministers, meeting with MPs, meeting with the different political parties.
Yanni,
cool.
Thank you. That's the whole process around developing the framework for developing the recovery action plan will be engaged, obviously, with local MPs. They are very much a part of the community. They're elected leaders within our community, so that they will be involved. They were invited to the Economic Recovery Forum to participate in that. So and that's right across the board. So that will continue to be the way of dealing with local MPs. Community leaders will be expected and invited to be part of the whole development of this action plan and the delivery thereof. And then on the other side of things, in terms of central government, obviously the Chief Executive has that role through Solgum, and we are having regular meetings with our local minister, the Minister for Greater Christchurch Regeneration.
Right, and can I just ask, so really the focus on this is doing the Christchurch 2050 plan and putting resources
No. It's
into doing that.
The focus for the sub-region is the Greater Christchurch 2050 plan. Christchurch has to have its own action plan, but this is not something that is to be delayed. You know, it's action oriented. That's why this is not a recovery plan or a strategy It is an action plan. These are the things that we have to do. Underpinning that is the Greater Christchurch area, which is actually the area for negotiating with central government in relation to urban development and transport. We already know that. The basis for all of the work that's being done on the public transport business cases are all done from a Greater Christchurch perspective, because the relationship between Christchurch City, Waimakariri and Selwyn districts is core critical to the future of our city, our sub-region and actually our region. They're all interconnected. So that's why this paper cascades across really the city, the Greater Christchurch area and the Canterbury Mayoral Forum, and they are all related, but there is no duplication.
Right, and so our plan will inform what we advocate for at a regional level. Is that kind of how you see it working? So we develop what we want, and then we use the regional level to advocate for that to happen to central government.
No. Look, I could just say yes and write it off, but I think you're misunderstanding the connections. They are independent and interdependent. So the interdependencies are what we can build on together. But when we are talking to central government about urban development and transport, we have to be talking as a Greater Christchurch team. And that means Christchurch, Waimakariri, Selwyn, the Canterbury Regional Council, and it means Te Runanga o Ngāi Tahu, and it means the Canterbury District Health Board, because that is where the linkages have been created through the Greater Christchurch Partnership. In terms of the region, you'll note that there has been quite a significant change in the approach of the Canterbury Mayoral Forum, and it has been very much driven off the back of the post-COVID-19 reality.
Right, and just the final question I had was, is there going to be any sort of public participation process like Share an Idea for the COVID-19 recovery, where the public can be engaged and working with us? And if so, what does that look like? Or when will that be decided?
I'm not designing it. We will design that, and it will be very much an outward engaged process, very much so. It has to be.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Anne.
Thank you. So I really applaud the intention to break down silos and to be working collaboratively. For example, following on from what Aaron was saying about employment, I know that Christchurch NZ is doing a huge amount in this space, but we actually don't know about it. So I'm wondering who is going to lead that work in breaking down those silos. I'm assuming it will be the CE?
There are two groups of silos that I'm mentioning. So every organisation of this scale has silos within it. It's just a matter of organisational structure. And we all know after the earthquakes that the silos came tumbling down, and it didn't take very long to build them back up again, because it's a natural, it is natural. We have to stop operating in silos. And that is an organisational responsibility, which we are casting to our Chief Executive, and we will be requiring her to be accountable for that. And it does mean that one arm of council can't operate without knowing what the other arm is doing, because it is clear that we have to ensure that we work collaboratively within the organisation. But there are silos between organisations. So we can't afford as a city to have double ups. We can't afford to have one group doing one thing. I would much rather that we enabled partner organisations, because this has to be done in partnership, partner organisations to be able to form a relationship with us so that we get the best of who does what out of the whole city. So this is a partnership approach. It's not council is responsible for delivering, but from a governance point of view, we are the elected representatives of the city, and we will hold the governance responsibility here. Yeah,
Can I say it?
Yeah, you can say it out loud.
I'm scribbling. And members, we talk about silos between officers. There are silos at governance level as well. So actually this is a mutual relationship, and I reflect back to you, you have already started breaking those silos down. First live example, 2 weeks ago, we met with Christchurch NZ's board and yourselves, and we went absolutely to drive down in terms of outcomes and impact and what that will mean. And you're doing that with ECAN, etc. So we have to look at this collectively about can we create that vision and image.
And we did it with, we're going to do it with CCHL as well.
Yep.
So we're going to have the council, CCHL independent directors and Christchurch NZ independent directors. So that's going to happen soon. And the other thing is that what came through very clearly, because as a Greater Christchurch partnership, and we've got 3 representatives on that, we had a session earlier this year, pre-COVID-19 occurring. We had a session that brought all of the members of the Greater Christchurch Partnership together for a workshop on the Greater Christchurch 2050, and all of us said how good it would be to have all of the councillors around the table to do the same together, because we're going to have to revisit it post-COVID-19 anyway. But sitting around the table with the Waimakariri district councillors, the ECAN ones, the Selwyn ones, representatives from Ngāi Tahu, I think you'll really enjoy the opportunity for us to have, I mean, it's going to be a large workshop, but sitting in smaller groups and working through these issues, we have more in common than we have that divides us. So I think it will be good. And the last thing that I'll mention in the context of silos is that I've arranged with the chair of CCHL to meet all of the chairs of the CCTOs. So the chairs of the trading organisations and myself and CCHL chair are going to have a discussion about collectively, again, the talent and skills that they bring to the table from a governance perspective. And I'll report back to you in relation to how that goes, but I think it's going to be pretty exciting. So those are that's the intention, and I present it to you. Jimmy.
Yeah. 2 questions. First one regarding to if today Council approve this high-level the strategic framework, what is the time frame Council will be working together with our strategic partners as well as the key communities to develop our integrated action plan? What's the time frame?
We'll be getting the Chief Executive to come back to us relatively quickly with a time frame.
Yes.
In terms of the Greater Christchurch 2050, that's on a longer track anyway, because it requires some in-depth work. It does require analysis around population and employment trends, and it's a much broader piece of work. Because it's also about the future economy. It's really about repositioning Greater Christchurch for the future.
Okay, thank you. Second question is, I think this integrated action plan is very, very crucial, because while so these are the integrated action plan, we can monitor and review, all those the performance measures, etc. However, I'm concerned those are the integrated action plan actually cover 3 stages of the pandemic, the kind of the impact, response, recovery, and reposition. Regarding to short term, probably not any problem, easy for us to monitor in those performance problems. But long term, how do we to monitor, how to integrate with our, I'm not sure, whether we understanding that once a year we did have our kind of the STEM intent and also our internal level of service, etc. But long term, how do we to monitor this?
Yeah,
still no any idea?
Yes,
No any
yes, I
idea.
do actually, and I'm perhaps that could have been a little bit clearer for you, but
Yes.
I think that the key will be in this recommendation 9, which is in relation to the indicators and performance measures.
Yes.
So they've got to be living and breathing. They can't be set in stone. So we will set indicators and performance measures. That's a governance decision,
Yes.
and so a recommendation will come back from staff in relation to what they might be.
Yes.
It does mean that we have to take that role of governance seriously, and that means that if we are not achieving the outcomes that we have established, then we have to call it out, and we have to be in a position to pivot, because we have to understand that this isn't going to be a linear process. This is going to be, things are going to get better, and then, well, things, oh no, I sounded like Trump then for a minute. Sorry, things are not going to get better. No, but the reality is that things change, and it isn't just a straightforward, we're at this position in time, and this is what will happen. You can't, life is not like that. And so we actually have to be in a position where we set realistic performance measures, but we have to do that to enable management and governance to be able to fully understand the impact of what they're doing. Because there is no point making decisions to do something if you don't understand what the impact is. And as a former Cabinet Minister, I can tell you the unplanned consequences or unseen consequences are the worst thing, because everyone will have expected you to have seen them in advance, and they will be, so so you raise a very good point, and it is going to require very good governance to ensure that we deliver.
But for all internal purchase, sorry, sub questions. We did have the leading the agency, particularly for those indicators, and we did have the supporting agency. Am I right? So every the agency how to bear their individual responsibility. Am I right? Regarding our measurement.
The overarching
Yes.
recovery will be the responsibility of
Yes.
the different agencies
Yes.
connecting, and so it will be different depending on what the circumstances are. But obviously health has been the leader of the
Yes.
response. The economic recovery, the government has played a huge role in terms of the economic recovery. And again, we don't want duplication.
Yes.
We have to make sure that what we do adds value.
Yes.
So,
Okay, thank you.
yeah, but in the
Okay.
context of the constrained environment that we're in as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Tim.
Thank you. Look, I think breaking down the silos, and there are so many, and they're perceived silos in many ways, but I mean, just to start a conversation, I think what could be quite good between, say, council-owned companies who are all owned by the ratepayers of Christchurch, that the AGMs of CCHL and the companies under that umbrella could be held at the function room here at the council rather than off in different places. And I think that would be a really good way to start that ball, because I think there's a lot of perception about what can and can't happen and what they're doing. There are a lot of positive things happening, but it is always seen or reported on the negative. So I think that we should actually start a lead in that and start opening that relationship between the people that own these organisations and ourselves and these companies. And I'd really like that conversation to start kind of getting some traction.
Cool. Well, I mean, there'll be a process for taking that up, so that's good. Pauline?
Yeah, it's just a small thing, but number 7, which we touch on procurement, and of course everything's changed so much now that we are going to be looking at local procurement, not just in our construction companies and subcontractors, but also in our service goods, what we and things that we've traditionally possibly sourced from overseas, that we need to have a really strong preparedness for having to source things here. And I'm just wondering if we need to have a bit more in there about that, and also harnessing, supporting local talent and supporting small, medium enterprises as well, because this is about our lead in the economic recovery. You know, I just think it could be broadened a wee bit.
It's, I mean, perhaps if I just get the Chief to respond to that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So, in reality, I think there's a real opportunity for this council to look at its procurement policy and think of that completely in a holistic way as you've described. It isn't just about the capital programme, it is also what we procure for service delivery, etc. And there will be elements in our policy, I think, that already exist, but I'm asking the head of procurement to look at that in the roundest sense. We should be doing that anyway, even if COVID hadn't happened, but it's even more important now, which would be thinking about that from a perspective of impact on employability, impact on equity, impact on climate, etc. So there's a real opportunity for us to look at that and get the balance between qualitative and price, and be really clear in terms of our specifications at each stage.
All right, so I'll open it up for debate. Sarah?
Thank you. Our world is changing, and changing faster now than ever before. The current pandemic has shown us that if we listen to the science and the experts, if we act together quickly with a sense of unity and purpose, we can effect real change. New Zealand saw it coming and we acted, even though other countries didn't act in the same way. And we are now in the enviable position of being able to recover and reposition. But we need to make sure that we also focus on the larger crisis facing us. We need to act on climate change and do it now if we are to avoid the worst impacts. The long-term plan we have started work on takes us through to 2031, 1 year past our citywide target of halving our emissions, and we need to make sure that it gets us there. Our 30-year infrastructure strategy will take us to 2051, well past where we need to be at a net neutral and a climate-adapted city. It needs to get us there. The costs of acting now are dwarfed by the costs of inaction, and the focus on intergenerational equity and well-being is critical. COVID has shown us that while the government can set policies to effect change and to help fund it, our individual actions all count too. So let's reposition ourselves as a sustainable 21st century garden city. Let's think ahead, work together, and act now.
Andrew?
Thank you. Firstly, I think this is an excellent report. It sets out the challenges and opportunities that we're faced with very well, and it addresses some key themes and considerations, particularly around teamwork, partnership, working together, breaking down silos, working in an integrated and collaborative way across agencies and organisations, and just as importantly, or possibly more importantly, communities. This is, of course, based on learnings from the earthquakes and other events that we've been through here in Christchurch, events that we've had the opportunity to learn from. And those experiences and this knowledge that we've gained in Christchurch previously are so valuable as we consider this current situation. Local leadership, been bold, doing things differently, realising that things are changed and are different, but also realising that that change creates some huge opportunity. So this report indicates a strong focus, one that I welcome, on the need for open, democratic and accountable ways of working, with agreed indicators and performance measures for ongoing monitoring of outcomes, but just as importantly, communicating these in a way that can be easily accessed and easily understood, both by elected members, by partners, and again, by the community. This is about including agencies and including people, about being open and transparent about what's been done and monitoring so that we and the community can see what has actually been achieved against clear and easily understood indicators. So the recovery needs to start now, and in fact some of the work referenced in this report is already underway. It needs to be well understood that this is an economic and social recovery. Council has a clear leadership role here, and this paper shows at a high level how we'll lead, but also in doing so, how we'll work collaboratively and inclusively. So I welcome this, but even more, I look forward to seeing real, tangible and measurable results as actions coming out of its implementation are reported back to us.
I've got Anne and Yanni.
Thank you. I just wanted to actually pay tribute to you, Leanne, and the work that you've done to bring this together. You are getting good at doing this recovery report, and we really appreciate what you've done. I think that I read somewhere that people crave certainty. They want to know where they stand and what their lives and hopes are going to look like for the future. And I think this is about hope. It's about sowing hope. And I think our residents want to move forward with a sense of confidence that the steps taken so far are working, and that the next phase and those that follow will be similarly carefully organised. I think credible information is crucial in a time like this, and that's our challenge. Our challenge is to communicate what we're doing and how we're doing it in a way that our residents understand and draw confidence and hope from. So I look forward to seeing that happen and to working together to bring about our recovery.
Thank you. Yanni?
Thank you. I think what's really important as a council that we learn the lessons from what didn't work so well after the earthquake, and I think this paper recognises that. One of the problems after the earthquake is we had a vision for the central city, but no vision for the whole city. And I think what's heartening about this is that it actually talks to having a collective vision across the city, because that's really the strength of every part of our city and community needs to be involved and engaged and have the investment in the same way that Central City has post-earthquake. So I think there's a lot of stuff to take to heart from this. It talks about principles of openness and transparency, and I really welcome that. I think the other thing is we do need to be very focused, we need to be very sharp, and we need to really identify what are the key things that we want to achieve. We can't have the risk of trying to be so good at so many different things that we end up with very average and mediocre outcomes. And so I look forward to the next piece of work, which I hope will really set clearly what it is we want. I do have some concern that we still don't seem to be getting enough leverage with central government to have a joint up approach. And just to give you one example is the new hospital that's being built that is going to be too small. And it just seems crazy to me at a time when we would want investment in terms of building in the construction sector, that you could actually have the hospital being built as the medical staff are wanting to service the needs of our community, and yet it's for some reason not. So I think there's some things that we need to take on board, that we need to strongly advocate to central government for the good of our city, and I hope that this process will enable us to do that in a way that makes sense and that gets support. I think the other thing we learned post-earthquake is there's no point in building a huge duplication of agencies, new agencies, existing agencies with the same powers as others, just all basically giving advice to each other. We wasted a lot of money doing that, a lot of time, and we actually can't measure what the outcomes were that we achieved from it. And I thought that review of the Central City Blueprint that Regenerate Christchurch did was excellent in identifying what some of those shortcomings were. And really one of the key takeaways is it was around understanding your community and understanding what you're trying to achieve with the people that are in it. And so I think this hopefully will be a different process that uses existing structures to get better efficiency and use of resource rather than duplicate and waste. And so I support that. I just wanted to finally conclude with a word of caution in terms of the region. It's great that we look at where the growth is occurring in our city and in our region, but let's not do that at the expense of taking our eye off the ball of some of the suburbs in the eastern part of the city that also deserve to be involved in the conversation about the future of public transport, for example. And so I hope that this process will look at equitably across the city around what our needs are as we grow and develop, not just into those outer areas of the region who have benefited hugely from what has happened with the previous urban development strategy at the expense of some of those existing neighbourhoods in the east of the city. So I welcome this work. I think we need to keep monitoring it, getting really clear outcomes, and being focused is the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Sam?
Oh, cool. Thank you, Leanne. And I want to acknowledge you. I think you've actually been really good in setting this framework up. I guess I do share a wee bit of Aaron's concern in terms of just the measures, but really look forward to the work that's going to be carried out to bring that back to us to monitor it going forward. Because I agree, it needs to be significantly tangible outcomes, or else there's literally no point doing it. The one I just wanted to point out was Resolution 7 around the council's direct role in the capital program. And I think that's a really good signal to send to Christchurch at the moment. And for me, if there's one takeaway from it, it's literally, it should be us endorsing a message that we want local businesses to put their hands up and help build our stadium. So I think, if there's one thing to take away, actually we want to employ local people and tick a couple of boxes at the same time, and that's going to be really beneficial for the city. So thank you.
Cool. I've got Tim and Jimmy.
Thank you, and I guess I'll follow from Sam and Aaron's outstanding report, and thank you very much for the work that you've done, and I know there have been others that worked on it. So, but the three key things and with any good report and any good paper are how you measure, what you measure, and when do we measure. And they are the three crucial things I believe that we really need to follow up on this, and when, where and how is absolutely crucial. And I do follow Sam's mentioning about supporting local companies, and part of that growing is about the local companies coming together and working together for strengthening their position in our community and our city and our region. And I think if we support them and we get buy-in from central government, which we will have to do because they are a partner, they're paying 50% of the multi-use arena. So I think hand in hand and improving those relationships would be outstanding.
Excellent. Jimmy.
Yes. Thank you, Mayor, taking a lead to establish this high-level helicopter strategic framework, particular focus on our city, how to dealing with recovery all those COVID-19 the pandemic, the crisis, and that's very, very crucial. And also, I'm very happy. This is not only the Christchurch only. The framework, particularly highlight, this is the wider Christchurch, the framework, because this COVID-19 pandemic affected not only this city, but also our region, and even the nation. So 5 million people all affected by this one. But I'm just concerned probably next stage, particularly to integrate with this action plan need to the more the positive, constructive to coordinate with all those the key stakeholders and also communities to develop this integrated action plan, because this action plan is implementable, monitoring, measurable. That's more important to give the people. Give the community, give a big group, have a strong feeling of council taking a lead, integrate with all those key stakeholders, for focus on those pandemic recovery, and also particular this long-term kind of recovery. It's not a one day only, so we need to more kind working together closely, for the future, the develop this one, and for the future implementation. Yeah, that's very crucial. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
I would have to start by saying there's nothing in this you could disagree with. You read a document like this and you go, yep, it all makes perfect sense. But when the public will look at this also, you'd have to ask the question, if we didn't do it, would it change any of the outcomes for the city? And I say that not wisely, having been schooled in the school of hard knocks, which is Christchurch of the last 10 years. And I look at the recovery post-quake and I compare us with other cities because, like some of the other councillors here, I was lucky enough to visit San Francisco. And they had the big earthquake of 1906, and some estimates is that their population dropped as low as 6,000. There was nothing left. I don't know how 300,000, as officially stayed there, did. And the remaining population stayed to turn devastation into opportunity. We didn't do that post-quake in Christchurch. I think the biggest failure was speed, and we cannot fail again. Speed was a big failure because in San Francisco, back when they didn't have hydraulics, they didn't have power tools, They didn't have the equipment you've got to use today. They managed to build 20,000 buildings in the first 3 years post-disaster, and 9 years after their massive earthquake which devastated the city, they held the World Exposition. And if you look at the pictures of what was in San Francisco, and that architecture is still there today and people still visit, that was within 9 years. This city failed. The leaders of this city failed. And I mean across every aspect of the city. We did not deliver the dream that the people wanted, which was seeded originally during Shiron idea. It was agreed and then just not delivered. We cannot do that again as a city. We have to get this right. And when you can turn devastation into opportunity, right now there's half a dozen industries that if we grab by the horns, we can be in a better position in a year's time than we were going to be if COVID didn't exist. That's the thinking you have to have. You have to find opportunity in disaster. You cannot go, oh, the world's falling down, everyone's going to be out of work, we can't do this, we can't do that. We were a can't city, we were Canterbury for the last 10 years, now we have to be Canterbury. And that is the attitude that has to go into it. So I will reluctantly support this because to me it could be just another document. But it's a better signal if the whole council and the whole city get behind a form of recovery and actually get it right this time, because I can't look the people of my city in the eye and say that in another 10 years' time, oh gee, COVID really stuck around, didn't it? It shouldn't. We can beat it. The medical people will get on top of it. It's knocking the world around right now, but this country is in an incredible position. Incredible. And, you know, when the crew of Avatar are flying in to spend $500 million and the Lord of the Rings crew have already kicked off spending $1 billion, there's one of the half a dozen industries that we should be looking at right now where NZ Inc. can grow. Look at the rest of the world still fighting and crumbling and wrecking itself, and we can excel and go back to being what was at the 1956. We were the richest nation per capita on the planet. Where did we go? Lift your game, Christchurch in New Zealand.
Oh, kia ora. Well, I'll just wind up. Oh, Mike.
Well, first I'd like to acknowledge and thank you. Have been hard for so many, but through the lockdown we did have a glimpse of a new lifestyle, a life where we lived in a city that was not car dependent. Our streets became quiet and people friendly, our air became cleaner. You know, the environment responded to our action, but we know that that had an economic impact. We need to change for the benefit of our future and future generations, but this needs to be a just transition. That transition needs to start now because it will take time to do it right, and time is not on our side. Let's think ahead and act now. While we're about to finalise our annual plan, which has been a response to COVID, I'm looking forward to our 10-year long-term plan, and our 30-year infrastructure strategy will take us out to 2051. It is time to reposition. It is time for Christchurch to become a sustainable 21st century garden city. Kia ora.
Thank you. I'll just wind up the debate. First of all, thank you for the acknowledgement, but I need to acknowledge Ivan Yafeta, Joanna Norris and Dawn Baxendale and others who came to the table to do a lot of the nutting out and a lot of the thinking, and Ivan in particular for holding the pen when I was doing some of the dictation, so, which is always very challenging. But I have built this off the back of experience. I wasn't sitting around this table when the earthquakes happened. I was sitting in Parliament, sadly in opposition, because I think from an opposition point of view, I always felt that it was wrong to have a government in an opposition position on a recovery of a city post a disaster. Post a disaster, well, in wartime Britain, it was a coalition government that ran the recovery, and I felt that the situation demanded a coalition response. In terms of the earthquake, nobody really sat around the table saying that they oppose something. They sat around the table scrutinising whether it was an appropriate way to go. Shiron idea was fantastic, and I actually agree with everything that you said, Aaron. When the councillors that went over to San Francisco, unfortunately that trip coincided with the person who'd been the mayor of San Francisco at the time of the earthquakes. He came to Christchurch for TEDxEQ Chicha, and I heard him speak. It was the most inspirational speech I've ever heard, and he talked about the necessity for courage. He talked about how courageous decisions needed to be made, and sometimes against huge opposition. He made the courageous decision, which cost him his job as the mayor, to take down and not rebuild the motorway, which meant, or the freeway, which meant that the entire waterfront was opened up to the city of San Francisco. And it was one of those wow moments. And I always remember, because he said that people will invest their capital after a disaster. I remember his words to this day. They've got capital to invest. A politician only has one capital to invest, and that's political capital. And he says, be courageous and do the right thing. So what we're signing off today, I don't want councillors to vote for it if they don't get in behind it, because this is not going to be easy. It's actually going to be hard. It is going to require courageous decisions, but we need to be enabling. Listen to what the people who've been submitting on our annual plan have been saying. I hope they come back to our long-term plan, because every single one of them have talked about the importance of collaboration and partnership. Every single one of them. The ones that have come here year after year after year asking for grants didn't come for a grant this year. They came for a partnership deal. They said, if you invest in our charitable status, if you invest in that opportunity that raises, we'll bring more money into the city to actually achieve our collective ambition. And it wasn't just the business sector who said that. Well, the business sector came in and said that's how you can do the central city, but they also said that model would work in New Brighton. And then you get the New Brighton Residents Association turning up and they say, hey, we'll have some of that too. Because we want to work in partnership. We know that we can do this if we're empowered and enabled. And that's what the council should be doing. And it's your point about Canterbury as opposed to Canterbury. We can be a can-do organisation, and we ought to be. And that's what we've told our chief executive we want to be. So this is an enabling framework, but every single one of us has to get in behind it and make it happen. So response, recovery, repositioning, all of the language is in there, but the delivery will be why we've got an action plan in front of us, or the concept in front of us today. And just to finally just note one of the submissions is that it is an opportunity to reset. So I've specifically called that out for Akaroa. While the cruise ships aren't in there, we can reset the environment for them. And actually, this is an opportunity for us as a whole city to do a bit of a reset as well and think about the kind of future that we want to have. So thank you all very much, and I will put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That is carried. Thank you. Thank you very much.